Alec believed her home was a safe haven, her marriage a forever promise. But one terrifying night, her husband changed. His mother's cruel words twisted him into a monster, and a brutal hit shattered Alec's world. This was just the start of her nightmare. She soon uncovered a hidden, locked box, bursting with dark secrets. Inside were chilling records, families from their street, forced to disappear. But the most shocking twist? Her own name was there, circled, with terrifying words, loyal for now. Could break. Must watch. He was spying on her, his own wife. Could she expose this horrifying truth that poisoned her community, or would she become another silenced victim? Prepare to be shocked to your core.
When I think back to that night, my chest still tightens like I can't get enough air. It's strange, isn't it? How the moments that break us don't come with warning signs or alarms. They creep in quietly, disguised as ordinary evenings, only to shatter everything you thought was safe. That's how it happened for me. My name is Alec Rose, and I never thought I'd be telling this story, but maybe I have to, because silence is the very thing that almost destroyed me. That day had started like any other. I remember folding laundry, setting out dinner, moving around the house the way I always did. My husband was at work, his mother had been calling in and out all afternoon, and I had this uneasy feeling in my stomach that I couldn't explain. You know that quiet before a storm? When the air feels heavy, and even though nothing has happened yet, your body already knows something is coming? That's exactly how it felt. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was nothing. I even hummed to myself while I set the table, pretending life was normal, pretending everything was fine. I'd been doing that for a long time, pretending. Pretending the sharp words his mother spoke didn't hurt. Pretending I didn't notice how his face would change whenever she whispered things into his ear. Pretending I still recognized the man who had once held my hand so gently. But that night, pretending wasn't enough. He came home later than usual, his shoulders tense, his eyes darting like he was already carrying someone else's anger. I asked if everything was okay, and for a moment he didn't answer. Then he told me he'd just been with his mother. My stomach sank. Because I knew what that meant. I didn't know the exact words she'd used, but I knew her pattern, little seeds of poison, little reminders that I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong, that he deserved someone different, someone better. I set the food on the table, hoping maybe dinner would soften the edges. But as we sat down, the silence between us was heavy. He barely touched his plate, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on me in a way that didn't feel like him anymore. I wanted to ask what she had said. I wanted to reach across the table and remind him who I was, his wife, the woman who had stood by him through everything. But before I could, he spoke, and his words cut deeper than I expected. "She's right, you know," he said. Just 3 words, but they changed everything. My heart sank. Right about what? Right about me. Right about us. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head, muttering about his mother, about disappointment, about shame. His voice grew louder, sharper, and I felt myself shrinking inside. It was like he wasn't even speaking his own thoughts anymore, like he had become a vessel for hers. I stood up to clear the plates, thinking maybe if I gave him space, the storm would pass. But then it happened. In one sudden motion, he rose from his chair, his hands swinging faster than my eyes could follow. The sound of it echoed before the pain even registered. My cheek burned, my body froze, and the world tilted on its axis. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. My husband, had hit me. Time stopped. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, the sting on my skin, the way my hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. But more than anything, I remember the look in his eyes. At first, it was anger. But then it shifted, just for a moment, to shock. He looked at me as if he hadn't expected his own hand to follow through, as if the reality of what he'd done had only just struck him too. But the damage was already done. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath came in ragged gasps, and 1,000 thoughts crashed through my mind all at once. Run. Scream. Fight back. Stay silent. Every option seemed impossible, yet I knew I had to choose something, or risk losing myself completely. I turned away, pressing my hand to my face, trying to steady my shaking body. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel his eyes on me, heavy with something I couldn't name, fear? Regret? Guilt? But none of it mattered in that moment. All I knew was that the man I loved had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. That was the night everything changed. But it wasn't just about the strike of his hand. That was only the beginning. What came after, what I discovered in the days that followed, would tear open secrets I never imagined were part of my life. Secrets that didn't just belong to him, or his mother, but to something much bigger, something that had been poisoning our community for years. And once I uncovered it, I knew I could never be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed with my back turned to him, staring at the darkness until it blurred into shapes I couldn't recognize. My cheek still throbbed where his hand had landed, but the ache in my chest was worse. I kept asking myself, over and over, was this really my life now? Was this what love had turned into? I listened to his breathing behind me, uneven, restless, like he couldn't escape what he'd done either. There were moments I thought he might reach out, that he might whisper an apology, but none came. The silence between us was louder than any scream. By morning, I forced myself to move like nothing had happened. I made coffee. I washed dishes. I put on the mask I'd been wearing for so long. It wasn't because I wanted to, God knows I wanted to crumble into pieces on the floor. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I broke the silence, everything would come crashing down, and I wasn't ready to face the fallout. When he finally left for work, I stood alone in the kitchen, my hand pressed against the counter to keep myself steady. That's when the phone rang. I didn't have to check the caller ID, I already knew who it was. His mother. I froze, listening to the shrill ring echo through the house. My stomach tightened. A part of me wanted to answer, to finally hear what poison she would pour into my ear directly. But another part of me couldn't bear it. I let it ring out, the silence afterward heavier than before. The rest of the day, I moved like a ghost. Every sound made me jump, the creak of the floorboards, the knock of the mail slot, even the sound of my own breath. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the house itself had become a prison. I kept replaying the night in my mind, his hand, his face, the shock in his eyes. But it wasn't just the violence that haunted me. It was the question behind it. What had his mother said to Ma? Could him turn on me like that? That evening, when he came home, I watched him closely. His face looked tired, drawn, like he hadn't escaped his own demons all day. He avoided my eyes, moving through the house like a stranger. We didn't talk. We didn't touch. We just existed in the same space, suffocated by silence. But then, something strange happened. Later that night, while I was in the living room, I heard a noise from the garage. A sharp clang, like metal hitting concrete. My body tensed. He hadn't told me he'd be working out there. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity tugged at me. I tiptoed toward the door and pressed my ear against it. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard his voice, low, urgent. He wasn't alone. Someone else was in there with him. My heart raced as I strained to listen. I caught fragments. Keep records. Don't let them stay here. Protect the neighborhood. The words didn't make sense at first. But the tone, the secrecy, the urgency, sent chills down my spine. Who was he talking to? What did he mean by, don't let them stay? My mind raced back to the families that had disappeared from our street over the years. The Johnsons. The Garcias. The wuss. I used to ask him why they moved so suddenly, and he'd always shrug it off. But now, hearing those words, a sickening realization began to take shape that I stumbled back from the door, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they'd hear it through the walls. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But deep down, I knew, this wasn't just about his anger, or his mother's words. There was something bigger. Something darker. When the garage finally went quiet, I slipped back into the bedroom and crawled under the covers, my body trembling. He came in a little while later, his clothes smelling faintly of cigarette smoke he never used to touch. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. Boo. I lay there with my eyes wide open, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. The next morning, when he left for work, I couldn't resist anymore. I went into the garage. The smell of oil and metal clung to the air, and for a moment I thought I might faint. I searched through drawers, under boxes, behind shelves, anything that might tell me what he was hiding. And then, tucked in the corner beneath a pile of old rags, I found it. A metal box. Cold. Heavy. Locked. My hands shook as I lifted it onto the workbench. I tugged at the latch, but it wouldn't open. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized, I wasn't supposed to find this. This was his secret, and maybe his mother's too. I could feel it in my bones that I shoved the box back into its place just as I heard the front door slam. He was home early. Panic shot through me like lightning. I rushed out of the garage and into the kitchen, grabbing a dish towel and pretending to wipe the counter as he walked in. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold it. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching, suspicious. My throat tightened, afraid he somehow knew what I'd seen. But then he looked away, muttering something about being tired, and went upstairs. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. All I could think about was that box. What was inside it? Why was it locked? And what did it have to do with the words I'd overheard? One thing was certain, whatever secrets that box held, they were the reason everything in my life was unraveling, and I knew, I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost me. That I couldn't get that box out of my head. That it haunted me, every minute, every hour, like it was whispering from the corner of the garage, begging me to open it, daring me to find out the truth I already feared. I tried to push it aside, but the harder I tried, the louder it called. My life had already changed the moment his hand struck me, but this box. I knew in my gut that it would explain why. The next day, I waited until he left for work. I didn't eat. I didn't move from the window until I saw his car disappear down the street. Then I went straight to the garage. My hands were clammy, my pulse hammering, but I didn't care. I needed answers. That I pulled the box from under the rags again, dragging it into the light. The lock gleamed, mocking me. I searched drawers, cabinets, even his old toolbox, until finally, shoved in the back of a shelf, I found a small key on a rusted chain. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. For a moment, I almost stopped. A voice inside me whispered, "Once you open this, you can't go back." But then I thought of the nights I'd spent in silence, of the sting of his hand on my face, of his mother's voice dripping poison. I turned the key, the latch clicked. The box opened. Inside was a stack of envelopes, each one thick, heavy with paper. I pulled one out and unfolded it. The handwriting made my stomach twist. It was his. My husband's. Familiar, careful, the same letters I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards. But what these pages held was nothing like those that at first, I thought it was a farewell. He had written about love, about duty, about protecting what was his. For a moment, I even felt a pang of grief, because it sounded like he was preparing to leave behind a legacy. But as I read on, my heart sank. The words shifted. He spoke of keeping the neighborhood safe, of standing firm against change, of watching those who didn't belong. My skin crawled as realization washed over me. He wasn't writing about protection. He was writing about exclusion. About driving people away that I flipped through the envelopes, my hands trembling. Inside were photographs, blurry snapshots of families on our street. The Johnsons. The Garcias. The Wus. Dates scribbled on the backs. Notes about when they moved, why they left. Only, they hadn't just moved. They had been pushed. Tears blurred my vision as I read one Lee. Any over and over again, they'll learn this place isn't for them. We'll make sure of it. My knees buckled. I dropped the papers onto the floor, my chest heaving. The families who vanished from our block, they hadn't left by choice. My husband, had been part of it. Not just part of it. He had recorded it, preserved it, as though it was something to be proud of. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to breathe, trying to stop the flood of nausea rising in my throat. The man I loved, the man I thought I knew, had lived a double life. And now, by finding this box, I had stumbled into the darkness he had hidden from me all along, but the horror didn't stop there. At the very bottom of the box, tucked beneath the envelopes, was a small black notebook. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were names. Pages and pages of names. Some I recognized, neighbors who had left quietly, their homes emptied overnight. Others I didn't. Each name had notes beside it: too loud, doesn't fit, not welcome, and then I saw my own name. It was scribbled near the back, circled in dark ink. Next to it were words that made my blood run cold: loyal for now. Could break. Must watch. The room spun. My breath caught in my chest. My husband hadn't just been keeping records of others. He had been keeping records of me. Watching me. Judging me. Deciding where I belonged, or if I belonged at all. I slammed the notebook shut, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. My mind raced with questions I couldn't bear to answer. If he could strike me once, what else was he capable of? If his mother already saw me as a threat, how long before I was just another name crossed off the list, another person driven out? I shoved everything back into the box, locked it, and shoved it into the shadows where I'd found it. My hands still trembled as I closed the garage door and leaned against it, my chest aching like it might cave in. That night, I couldn't look at him the same. I sat across from him at the table, staring at the man who had shared my bed, who had whispered promises of forever. But now, every word, every smile, every touch I remembered felt like a lie. He asked me once why I was so quiet, but I couldn't answer. How could I? How could I tell him I knew the truth, that I had seen the monster hiding behind his ordinary face? When he left the room, I pressed my hands to my chest, fighting the scream that clawed at my throat. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave everything behind. But a part of me couldn't. Because if I left, the truth would stay buried. No one would ever know what those families endured, and deep down, I knew, I couldn't let that happen, but fear clung to me like a shadow. If he ever found out I had opened the box, if he ever realized I knew his secret, I might not get another chance. So I kept quiet. I smiled when I had to. I nodded when he spoke. I played the part of the obedient wife. All the while, the truth sat locked away in that box, and I knew one day, sooner or later, he would realize I had seen it, and when that day came, I didn't know if I would survive it. I couldn't sleep. Night after night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside me. I pretended to be asleep, afraid that if I moved, if I breathed wrong, he would sense it, he would know. Every time he turned, my body stiffened. Every time he reached for me, I flinched. The box had changed everything. The words in that notebook burned into my mind: loyal for now. Could break. Must watch. He had written it about me. About his own wife. That thought alone made my skin crawl. I couldn't trust him anymore. I couldn't even trust myself, because part of me kept thinking, what if he already knew? What if he had seen the lock moved, the key out of place, the papers shuffled? days bled into each other. I wore my mask well. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled when he looked my way. But inside, I was unraveling. Gee, my heart pounded every time I heard the garage door creak. Every time his mother's voice echoed in my head, whispering that I wasn't one of them. Every time his eyes lingered on me a second too long, and then, it happened that it was a Thursday night. The house was quiet, too quiet. He sat at the table, sipping a glass of whiskey, staring at me in a way that made my chest tighten. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. I tried to busy myself with dishes, anything to avoid his gaze. But then he spoke, Alec, his voice was calm. Too calm. Did you touch my things in the garage? The plate in my hand nearly slipped. My throat went dry. For a second, I couldn't breathe. What? No. Why would I? He didn't blink. He didn't look away. He just stared at me, his eyes sharp, searching. Because, he said slowly, something isn't the way I left it. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I forced a laugh, too quick, too nervous. You're imagining things. Maybe you forgot. But his lips curled into a thin smile. Not the kind that reached his eyes. The kind that made my stomach twist into knots. He stood, setting his glass down with a soft clink. You've been different, he said, his voice low. Quiet. Distant. Like you're hiding something. I shook my head, backing away without realizing it. I'm just tired. That's all. He stepped closer. My back hit the counter. My breath caught in my chest. His hand pressed against the counter beside me, trapping me in place. Are you tired, Alec? He whispered, or are you lying to me? My pulse raced. My body screamed to run, but my legs felt like stone. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot against my cheek. For a moment, I thought he might hit me again. My mind flashed back to that night, his hand striking me, the shock, the sting, the humiliation. I braced myself, but instead, he leaned back slowly, his smile fading into something colder. Something darker, you know, he said, almost casually, people who don't belong here, they disappear. They always do. My stomach dropped. His words weren't just a threat, they were a warning. He knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the details, but he knew enough to make me afraid. That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the dark, shaking. His words replayed in my head like a broken record. People who don't belong, disappear. Was I next? The fear was unbearable. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I felt like the walls of the house were closing in on me, trapping me with him, with his secrets, with his violence waiting to break loose again. And then came the breaking point. 2 nights later, I heard him in the garage long after midnight. The sound of papers shuffling. The scrape of metal against concrete. I crept down the hallway, every step making my heart race faster, until I stood at the door. Through the crack, I saw him, kneeling beside the box, the contents spread out around him. The letters. The photos. The notebook that he was holding, the page with my name, his finger traced the words. Loyal for now. Could break. Must watch. And then he looked up. Straight at the door that I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath came fast, ragged. I ran into the bedroom, dove under the covers, and squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my body to still. Minutes later, I heard his footsteps. Slow. Steady. Coming closer, the door creaked open. The floorboards groaned under his weight. For a long, agonizing moment, he stood there. Watching me. That I kept my breathing steady, pretending to be asleep, though every muscle in my body screamed with terror. Finally, he moved away. The door shut. His footsteps faded, But I knew that he knew I had seen, the game was over, and as I lay there in the dark, my hands clutching the sheets, one thought clawed at me, refusing to let go. If I don't do something soon, I might not live to tell this story. The morning after felt unreal. The sunlight poured through the curtains, warm and golden, but it felt like a cruel trick. The house looked normal, the table, the dishes, the quiet hum of the fridge, but nothing was normal anymore. Not after the garage. Not after the look he gave me through that crack in the door. That I couldn't keep living like this. Every moment was a ticking clock, and I didn't know how much time I had left before it stopped. My hands shook as I poured coffee, the cup rattling against the saucer. He sat across from me, calm, composed, like nothing had happened. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew. And he wanted me to know that he knew. The silence was unbearable. It stretched between us like a tightrope ready to snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady, almost kind. "You've been restless," he said. "Not yourself." I forced a smile. "Just tired." But deep down, I felt the walls closing in. That notebook, those words, "loyal for now," could break. Must watch. They were a cage. And I was already inside it. That afternoon, I made my decision. My hands trembled as I packed a small bag, slipping the papers I had hidden into the bottom. My heart hammered so loud I thought he would hear it from the other room. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the slam of a car door outside, made me jump. I told myself I wasn't running away. I was surviving, but fate wasn't going to let me leave quietly. As I stepped toward the door, bag clutched tight, his voice cut through the silence. "Going somewhere?" I froze. My throat went dry. Slowly, I turned to see him standing in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes locked on mine. I was just, my words faltered. I couldn't think of an excuse fast enough. My mind raced, his gaze dropped to the bag in my hand. He stepped closer. "You think you can just walk away?" His voice was calm, but the calm was worse than shouting. It was the calm of a storm right before it hits. My knees shook, but I forced myself to stand taller. "I can't stay here anymore." Something flickered in his eyes, anger, disbelief, maybe fear. For the first time, he didn't look like the man I had loved or even the man who had hurt me. He looked lost. Like he knew this was the moment everything unraveled. The silence between us was suffocating. And then, without warning, his hand shot out, grabbing the bag from me. He yanked it open, rifling through the contents until he found the papers. His face darkened. His hands trembled as he held them up, shaking them in front of me. "You read it," he whispered. "You went through everything." I didn't answer. I couldn't. His breathing quickened, his eyes wild. "Do you know what this means, Alec? Do you know what you've done?" And then, something unexpected happened. He dropped the papers. They fluttered to the ground like broken wings. He stepped back, his hands clutching his head, his voice breaking. "I didn't want this. I never wanted you to see it." For a moment, I saw something human in him, shame, maybe even regret. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The lies, the hate, the violence, they had been there all along, and no amount of regret could erase them. I bent down, gathering the papers, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. When I looked up, tears stung my eyes, but my voice was steady. "I won't be silent anymore." His face twisted, torn between rage and desperation. But before he could speak, I walked past him. My legs carried me forward, one step at a time, even though every nerve in my body screamed with fear. I didn't look back. Not once. That night, I didn't just leave the house. I left the silence. I left the cycle, but leaving didn't mean escaping. Not really. The weight of that box, those words, those families driven out, it all came with me. I carried it in my chest, in the nightmares that still wake me, in the way I jump when I hear footsteps behind me, and yet I also IED something else. The strength of knowing I had survived. The strength of refusing to be part of his darkness. When I finally turned those papers over, when I told the truth, I realized this was never just my story. It was the story of everyone who had been silenced, erased, told they didn't belong. It was about hate passed down like an inheritance, and the courage it takes to break that chain, but the question that still haunts me is this: how many more will stay silent before they, too, decide enough is enough? How many more bruises, how many more broken lives, before silence finally shatters? I survived. But survival isn't the end. It's only the beginning, because one voice can break the silence. But together, we can end it.